Britain didn't lose America at Yorktown. It lost America in the forests of New York. One British general marched south with nearly 8,000 men, convinced the revolution was already over. 4 months later, he surrendered an entire army. That single defeat changed the mind of France and changed the course of world history forever. This story is not about a battle. It is about a chain of events. A chain that began in the drawing rooms of Whitehall with a plan that looked brilliant on paper, ran through the wilderness of upstate New York, where that plan came apart piece by piece, and ended in a muddy field on the Hudson River, where a British general handed over nearly 6,000 soldiers and unknowingly handed France its reason to enter the war. Burgoyne didn't simply lose a campaign. He triggered the chain of events that made British victory impossible. Every decision he made, every miscalculation, every moment he pressed forward when a rational commander would have turned back, all of it contributed to a surrender that was not simply a military defeat. It was the moment the American Revolution stopped being a colonial rebellion and became a global war that Britain could not win. Before we go any further, subscribe right now if you are not already here, because this is the Saratoga story most documentaries never tell, not the surrender, the chain. And understanding the chain changes everything about how you see the American Revolution. To understand why Burgoyne's defeat mattered so much, you first have to understand how confident Britain was in the spring of 1777. The mood in London was not worried. It was impatient. The Continental Army had been chased out of New York the previous autumn. Washington's ragged troops were camped in the frozen hills of New Jersey, barely holding together. Desertions were constant. Enlistments were expiring. The Continental Congress was printing paper money that nobody trusted. Parliament assumed the whole rebellion was a tantrum that would burn itself out once the colonists realized they could not actually fight a modern European army. This thing should have been over already. The plan to end it came together during the winter of 1776 and 1777. A powerful British army would march south from Canada through the wilderness of upstate New York, following the classic invasion corridor of Lake Champlain and the Hudson River. Their objective was Albany, the gateway to the Hudson Valley. Simultaneously, General William Howe, commanding the main British force in New York City, would push his troops northward up the Hudson. A smaller third force under Colonel Barry St. Leger would strike east from Lake Ontario through the Mohawk Valley. When all three columns converged, they would control the entire Hudson corridor from New York City to Montreal, slicing the 13 colonies in two. New England, the beating heart of the rebellion, would be isolated from the middle and southern colonies. Cut off from supplies, reinforcements, and coordination, the revolution would starve. On paper, it was brilliant. On the ground, it was a disaster waiting to happen. The man who lobbied hardest for command and ultimately won it was Lieutenant General John Burgoyne. He was 54 years old, a veteran of the 7 Years' War, a member of Parliament, and a man who wrote plays in his spare time. He was charming, articulate, socially ambitious, and absolutely convinced of his own genius. His soldiers called him Gentleman Johnny, partly out of affection and partly because the man insisted on living well, even in the wilderness. He traveled with a personal wine cellar, a portable writing desk, multiple changes of uniform, and his mistress. Burgoyne had pitched the plan directly to King George III and to Lord George Germain, the Secretary of State for the American colonies. Both men approved it enthusiastically. Burgoyne sailed for Canada in the spring of 1777 with the confidence of a man who had already written his victory speech. That confidence was about to become the most expensive miscalculation of the entire war. In June of 1777, Burgoyne assembled his invasion force at St. John's on the Richelieu River in Quebec. The army was formidable, roughly 7,800 troops in total, 4,000 British regulars, trained in the linear tactics of European warfare, 3,000 German soldiers from the duchies of Brunswick and Hesse-Hanau, professional mercenaries rented out by their own princes and deeply unhappy about being shipped across the Atlantic to fight someone else's war. The rest of Burgoyne's force was a patchwork of loyalist volunteers, French-Canadian militia, and several hundred Native American warriors from nations along the frontier, primarily Iroquois, Huron, and Algonquin. Burgoyne also dragged along a massive artillery train of more than 130 cannons. And behind the army stretched a baggage convoy that seemed to go on forever. Ammunition, rations, tents, engineering equipment, and Burgoyne's personal luxuries. This was an army built for a victory parade, not a wilderness campaign. The first phase went almost too well. On July 6th, Burgoyne's forces captured Fort Ticonderoga, the American stronghold on Lake Champlain, virtually without firing a shot. The Americans abandoned the fort in the night after British artillery was hauled to the summit of nearby Mount Defiance, giving them a clear line of fire down into the fortifications. The garrison fled, leaving behind hundreds of cannons, tons of supplies, and dinner still on the tables. The news electrified London. King George reportedly burst into Queen Charlotte's chambers, shouting that he had beaten all the Americans. Burgoyne's morale hit the ceiling, and that overconfidence was about to cost him everything. Instead of continuing south by water, which would have been faster and far less exhausting, Burgoyne chose to push his army overland through 23 miles of dense virgin forest between Skensborough and Fort Edward on the upper Hudson River. This decision was a catastrophic mistake. American General Philip Schuyler, understanding he could not stop Burgoyne in a pitched battle, ordered the most aggressive scorched earth campaign of the entire Revolution. American work parties felled enormous trees across every road and trail. They destroyed every bridge. They dammed creeks to flood the low ground. They rolled boulders into the narrow forest passes. They burned every standing crop and slaughtered or drove off every head of cattle, stripping the countryside bare. What should have been a march of 2 or 3 days turned into a crawling nightmare lasting more than 3 weeks. Burgoyne's troops were hacking through tangled wilderness in brutal July heat, building 40 bridges and an extensive log causeway over 2 miles of swamp, all while dragging those 130 cannons over terrain that swallowed wheels up to the axles. The supply line back to Canada stretched thinner with every agonizing mile. And then came the incident that accelerated everything. A young loyalist woman named Jane McCrae, waiting to be reunited with her fiancé in Burgoyne's army, was killed and scalped by Native American warriors allied with the British. The murder of a white woman by Burgoyne's own allies became an instant propaganda sensation across the colonies. Recruitment into the American militia surged. Men who had been sitting on the fence grabbed their muskets and marched north. Burgoyne's alliance with Native American war parties, which was supposed to terrorize the frontier into submission, was instead driving thousands of armed volunteers straight into the American camp. Stop here for a moment. Burgoyne has not yet fought a major battle, but he has already lost his supply line, exhausted his army, enraged the population, and triggered a surge in American recruitment that will eventually outnumber him more than 2 to 1. Every single decision has made his situation worse. Subscribe if you are not already here, because the next part, Bennington, Freeman's Farm, and the 18 days that sealed his fate, is where this story becomes extraordinary. By early August, Burgoyne's army was starving for supplies. Horses were dying. Rations were running short. He made a fateful decision. He sent approximately 700 troops, mostly German dragoons and loyalists under Lieutenant Colonel Friedrich Baum, on a raid toward the town of Bennington in the Hampshire Grants, the territory we now call Vermont. The objective was to seize horses, cattle, wagons, and whatever supplies could be found. British intelligence reports indicated the area was thinly defended and populated by loyalist sympathizers. Those intelligence reports were disastrously wrong. What Baum found waiting for him near Bennington was Brigadier General John Stark and roughly 2,000 furious New Hampshire and Vermont militiamen. Stark was a veteran of Rogers Rangers from the French and Indian War, a man who knew frontier fighting in his bones. He had quit the Continental Army over a promotion dispute, but re-enlisted when he heard the British were coming. On the morning of August 16th, Stark reportedly pointed at the German position on a hilltop and told his men that there were the Redcoats and they would be theirs by nightfall, or Molly Stark would sleep a widow. His men attacked from multiple directions simultaneously. The fighting was ferocious. Baum was fatally wounded. When a relief column of another 700 Germans arrived that afternoon, Stark's forces, reinforced by Colonel Seth Warner and the Green Mountain Boys, smashed them as well. By sunset, Burgoyne had lost nearly 1,000 men killed, wounded, or captured. 1/8 of his entire army vanished in a single afternoon. He had gained nothing, not a single horse, not a head of cattle, not a wagon of supplies. The first serious cracks were spreading through the foundation of the entire campaign. To make matters worse, the third prong of the invasion had also failed. Colonel St. Leger's force, which was supposed to sweep east through the Mohawk Valley and join Burgoyne near Albany, had been stopped cold at Fort Stanwix and then routed after Benedict Arnold scattered St. Leger's Native American allies with a clever deception involving exaggerated reports of an enormous approaching American army. St. Leger retreated back to Canada. Burgoyne was now the only British commander still advancing, and he was doing it alone. And then came the piece of news that should have made any rational commander turn his army around immediately. General William Howe, the man who was supposed to push north from New York City and link up with Burgoyne at Albany, was not coming. Howe had decided to load his army onto ships and sail south to capture Philadelphia instead. He believed taking the American capital would be the decisive blow. He was wrong about that too. But his decision left Burgoyne completely alone. There would be no relief from the south, no reinforcements, no link-up at Albany. Burgoyne was marching deeper into hostile territory with a shrinking, hungry army and no rescue on the horizon. A prudent general would have retreated to Ticonderoga and waited for new orders. Burgoyne was not a prudent general. He pushed forward across the Hudson River, cutting his own line of retreat behind him. In mid-September, Burgoyne crossed the Hudson on a bridge of boats near the village of Saratoga. South of him, blocking the road to Albany, the entire American Northern Army was dug in on a commanding position called Bemis Heights. The fortifications had been designed by Colonel Thaddeus Kosciuszko, a Polish military engineer who had volunteered for the American cause and who understood exactly how to use the terrain. The bluffs overlooked the Hudson on one side and were flanked by dense forest on the other. The American force had swelled enormously since the dark days after Ticonderoga. General Horatio Gates had taken command, and militia companies were flooding in from across New England and upstate New York. Farmers, blacksmiths, shopkeepers, men who had never fought a pitched battle in their lives, were arriving with their own muskets. Drawn by the news from Bennington and the growing conviction that the British could actually be stopped, Gates now commanded between 12 and 15,000 troops. Burgoyne had fewer than 6,000 effectives. He was outnumbered more than 2 to 1, and he was about to attack anyway. The first major clash came on September 19th at a clearing called Freeman's Farm, roughly a mile north of the American fortifications. Burgoyne sent 3 columns probing through the woods, looking for a way to flank or break through the American position. What he encountered instead was Benedict Arnold. Arnold was at that point the most aggressive and tactically gifted field commander in the Continental Army. He was also impossible to work with. Vain, prickly about rank, locked in a poisonous feud with Gates over credit and authority. But on that September afternoon, None of that mattered. Arnold convinced the cautious Gates to send Daniel Morgan's riflemen and Henry Dearborn's light infantry forward into the woods to meet the British in the open rather than letting them approach the fortifications. The battle that erupted at Freeman's Farm was some of the most savage fighting of the entire war. For nearly 4 hours, the two sides hammered each other across that clearing. Morgan's Virginia and Pennsylvania riflemen, armed with long rifles accurate at distances that seemed impossible to the British, picked off officers and artillerymen with methodical precision. The British would fix bayonets and charge, driving the Americans back into the tree line. Then American reinforcements would pour in, and the British would lose every yard they had gained. By nightfall, the British technically held the field, but they had suffered nearly 600 casualties, including a devastating number of experienced officers. The Americans lost about 300. It was the kind of victory that destroys an army. Then came 18 days of agony. Burgoyne dug in at Freeman's Farm and waited. He waited for reinforcements from Clinton in New York City, who made a half-hearted push up the Hudson before turning back long before reaching Albany. He waited for supplies that did not exist. He waited for his situation to improve. And every single day, it got worse. American numbers kept climbing. Militia arrived in a steady stream, extending Gates's lines further around Burgoyne's flanks. At night, American raiding parties slipped through the darkness to steal horses, pick off sentries, and burn supply caches. Burgoyne's soldiers were on half rations, then less. The horses were eating bark. Desertion among the Loyalists and Canadian militia accelerated sharply. The Native American warriors, reading the situation with clear eyes, quietly disappeared into the forest. Burgoyne still drank his champagne at dinner. He had no plan. On October 7th, Burgoyne played his last card. He sent a reconnaissance force of approximately 1,500 troops forward to probe the American left flank, looking desperately for any weakness that might let him break through to Albany. This was the Battle of Bemis Heights, and it was where the campaign came to die. The Americans spotted the movement almost immediately. Gates ordered a full-scale attack. Daniel Morgan's riflemen hit the British right flank. Enoch Poor's New Hampshire Brigade smashed into the left. The British center buckled under converging fire from multiple directions, and then Benedict Arnold came thundering onto the field. Arnold had been formally relieved of his command after a furious shouting match with Gates. He had spent the previous 18 days in bitter fury, pacing his tent. Now, against direct orders and possibly drunk, he galloped into the fight like a man who no longer cared whether he lived or died. He rode between the lines, rallying American units, directing attacks, physically leading charges. He was everywhere at once, a screaming, reckless, magnetic force that pulled the entire American assault forward. In the late afternoon, he led a direct assault against the fortified German position known as the Bryman Redoubt, a key anchor of the entire British right flank. The Americans swarmed over the defenses. Arnold's horse was shot from under him. The falling animal crushed his left leg, shattering the same bone he had broken at Quebec in 1775. He went down screaming. If that musket ball had hit him 2 feet higher and killed him, Benedict Arnold would be remembered today as one of the greatest heroes the Revolution ever produced. Instead, his story would take a very different turn. The fall of the Bryman Redoubt unraveled the entire British position. Burgoyne's right flank collapsed. His troops retreated in disorder as darkness and rain closed in. They had lost another 600 men. Among the dead was Brigadier General Simon Fraser, one of Burgoyne's most capable commanders, brought down by a rifle shot from an estimated 300 yards as he rode back and forth along the crumbling British line, trying to hold it together. When Fraser fell, the last thread of British cohesion snapped with him. That night, in pouring rain, Burgoyne ordered a retreat northward, toward Saratoga. The army stumbled through darkness, over roads that had turned to rivers of mud. The wounded had to be abandoned where they lay. American forces followed on every side. Militia units had already cut the roads to the north. Within 4 days, Burgoyne found himself completely surrounded. His army was huddled in a shrinking perimeter on the heights above the Hudson River near the ruins of General Schuyler's country estate. American artillery fired from across the river with impunity. Sharpshooters made it lethal to stand upright anywhere in the camp. There was no food. There was no ammunition to spare. There was no escape route. Burgoyne opened negotiations. On October 17, 1777, General John Burgoyne formally surrendered his army to Major General Horatio Gates. Officers kept their swords and personal property. The troops marched out with the honors of war, drums beating and colors flying, before stacking their muskets in a field. 5,791 soldiers laid down their arms that afternoon, the largest surrender of British troops on a foreign battlefield in living memory. Burgoyne told Gates that the fortunes of war had made him a prisoner. It was a gracious line for a man watching his career, his reputation, and his army dissolve in the October mud. Now here is the part of this story that matters most. Not the surrender itself. What the surrender triggered. In Paris, Benjamin Franklin had been lobbying the French court for months, trying to convince King Louis XVI that the American cause was worth backing openly. The French had been secretly funneling weapons, gunpowder, and money to the rebels through front companies for over a year, but they refused to commit publicly while the Americans kept losing. Saratoga changed the calculation overnight. If the Continental Army could surround and capture an entire British field army, this was no longer a desperate peasant revolt. This was a winnable war. And France saw a once-in-a-generation opportunity to humiliate its oldest rival. On February 6, 1778, France signed 2 treaties with the United States, one of commerce and one of formal military alliance. French gold filled American war chests. French warships challenged British naval dominance in the Atlantic and the Caribbean. French officers, including the Marquis de Lafayette, joined Washington's command staff. French soldiers and Marines would eventually fight alongside the Continental Army at the decisive siege of Yorktown in 1781. Spain and the Netherlands entered the conflict as well, turning what had been a colonial rebellion into a global war that stretched British resources across multiple oceans and multiple theaters simultaneously. Britain was no longer fighting the colonies. It was fighting the world. And none of it, not the French alliance, not the Spanish entry, not the Dutch involvement, not Yorktown, not American independence, happens without Saratoga. That is the chain. Burgoyne's overconfidence produces the plan. The plan produces the Wilderness Campaign. The Wilderness Campaign produces Bennington and Freeman's Farm and 18 days of slow strangulation. 18 days produce the Battle of Bemis Heights. Bemis Heights produces the surrender. The surrender changes the mind of France. France changes the war. The war ends at Yorktown, and America exists. Remove any link in that chain, and the outcome is different. Burgoyne returned to England on parole in 1778 and spent the rest of his life explaining what went wrong. He blamed Germain for the confused orders. He blamed Howe for abandoning the plan. He blamed the wilderness, the weather, the Americans, and the sheer impossible logistics of fighting a war 3,000 miles from home. Parliament held inquiries. Burgoyne testified. He never received another command. He drifted back to the theater, wrote a moderately successful comedy, and died in 1792. Remembered not for his wit or his plays, but for losing an entire army in the forests of New York. Benedict Arnold survived his wound at Bemis Heights, but emerged bitter and broken. His shattered leg never healed properly. He walked with a painful limp for the rest of his life. He watched Horatio Gates, who had stayed safely behind the fortifications during both battles, receive all the credit and all the glory for the victory at Saratoga. The injustice ate at him. Combined with financial desperation and a sense that Congress had never adequately recognized his sacrifices, Arnold's resentment curdled into something darker. In 1780, just 3 years after his greatest triumph, he attempted to hand the fortress at West Point over to the British for £20,000. The plot was discovered. Arnold fled to British lines and spent the rest of the war fighting against the country he had once bled for. At Saratoga, there is a monument to his heroism. It depicts a boot, representing his wounded leg. It bears no name. The same man who charged the Bremen Redoubt and saved the Revolution became its most infamous traitor. Britain didn't lose America at Yorktown. Yorktown was the ending. Saratoga was the moment the ending became inevitable. One general's overconfidence produced a plan too rigid for the wilderness it encountered. The wilderness ground that planned down over weeks of heat and mud and starvation. The grinding produced the battles produced the surrender produced the alliance produced the World War produced the peace that created the United States. That is what one surrender in a muddy field in upstate New York actually was. Not a battle, a chain reaction. And it started because one man was so convinced the revolution was already over that he never seriously considered the possibility that it was not. Here is the question Saratoga keeps raising. At what point was Burgoyne's campaign beyond saving? Was it when Howe sailed south to Philadelphia instead of north to Albany? Was it when Burgoyne chose the overland route through the wilderness? Was it Bennington? Was it the 18 days he spent waiting for help that was never coming? Or was it always going to end this way? Because a plan built on the assumption of easy victory had no capacity to adapt when the victory turned out not to be easy at all. Drop your answer in the comments. Because the debate has been running since 1777, and nobody has fully settled it yet. If this story changed how you see the American Revolution, not as a story about battles, but as a story about chains of consequence, share it with someone. Not for the channel, for the idea. Subscribe if you are not already here. Because next time, we are covering the moment another empire discovered too late that the war it thought it was winning had already been lost somewhere it was not looking. The forest is just where this one happened.